For 20 nights, researchers wired up an entire Hadza hunting camp in Tanzania with activity trackers. And when they added up all the minutes, every single person in that camp was asleep at exactly the same time for a grand total of 18 minutes. Not 18 minutes a night, 18 minutes across the whole study. Someone was almost always stirring, listening, half awake in the dark. And once you know that, you start to understand something our ancestors knew in their bones. Sleep is the most dangerous thing a human body does. I'm Otto, and today I want to take you back to the actual physical problem of ancient sleep. Not dreams, we've covered that one already. Just the plain practical question every human being on Earth had to solve for hundreds of thousands of years. Where do you put your unconscious, defenseless body when the sun goes down and something out there might want to eat you? Start with the basic math of vulnerability. Anthropologists Charles Nunn and David Sampson compared sleep across 30 primate species and found something strange. Humans sleep less than almost any of our relatives, about 7 hours a night on average, when our body size and biology would predict something closer to 9.5. We are, by primate standards, chronically underslept. One leading explanation is that our ancestors couldn't afford to sleep the way a safely nested chimpanzee could. Lying flat, eyes closed, muscles slack, a sleeping human is slower to react, harder to smell danger, and about as easy a meal as the savannah offers. Every extra hour spent unconscious was an hour of risk, so evolution seems to have trimmed the bill down to the minimum that still lets a brain function. Our close relatives never quite solved this problem the way we did either. Chimpanzees build a fresh nest almost every single night, bending branches into a platform up in the tree canopy, specifically to keep their bodies away from ground-level predators like leopards. At some point, our own ancestors gave that up entirely and started sleeping flat on open ground, which on paper is an even more exposed position than a nest in the branches. Researcher David Sampson, who has spent years studying exactly this shift, treats it as one of the real puzzles of human evolution. It suggests fire and group living weren't just conveniences. They may have been the only things that made ground sleeping survivable in the first place. The first real fix for that problem was fire. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, researchers examining burned bone fragments found evidence that early members of our genus, likely Homo erectus, were carrying fire deep into the cave and keeping it burning as far back as 1.8 million years ago, according to a 2026 study led by Leora Kolska-Horwitz. They weren't necessarily starting these fires from scratch. It looks more like they were scooping up flame from a natural wildfire and hauling it home, then tending it. A fire at the mouth of a shelter did 3 jobs at once. It kept nocturnal predators at a distance, it kept bodies warm through cold nights, and it lit up the darkness just enough that a half-asleep sentinel could actually see a threat coming. Fire also explains why ancient humans didn't sleep alone. If you're keeping a flame going and watching for eyes in the dark, you want company. Among the Hadza today, researcher Alyssa Crittenden and her colleagues have documented that married couples and their children routinely sleep together in the same small hut, often with almost no separation between bodies, especially in the cooler months. The anthropologist Carol Worthman spent years studying sleep across cultures and came to a blunt conclusion. It's Western sleep, alone in a dark, quiet room, that's the true evolutionary oddball. For nearly all of human history, sleep was a group activity, piled together for warmth, arranged around a fire, with someone's shoulder or knee touching yours the whole night through. So where exactly were these bodies piled up? The archaeological record actually preserves this. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologist Lynn Wadley and her team found compacted layers of grass and sedge bedding, dating back 77,000 years, essentially ancient mattresses, built up in more than a dozen layers over tens of thousands of years of use. Mixed into the oldest layer were leaves from a plant called Cryptocarya woodii, a kind of wild laurel with natural insect-repelling properties. In other words, whoever built that bed in South Africa 77,000 years ago already understood pest control well enough to line their bedding with a natural bug spray. And when the bedding got too infested or dirty to save, the evidence shows they simply burned it and started a fresh layer on top. A similar story shows up at Ohalo 2, a 23,000-year-old fishing camp now underwater in the Sea of Galilee. There, archaeologists found the remains of oval brush huts with grass bedding arranged in a ring around a central hearth, one of the earliest known examples of a home with a defined sleeping area built right into the floor plan. Not everyone had access to caves or riverside grass, of course. Depending on the season and the landscape, ancient humans also slept on packed earth, close to the coals, or on simple platforms of branches and hide, wrapped in animal skins. That basic setup held for an enormous stretch of time. It was only much later, as some groups settled into permanent villages, that you start seeing raised bed frames in the record. Stone sleeping platforms at Skara Brae in Neolithic Scotland, elevated wooden beds in early Egypt. Those are comparatively recent inventions. For the vast majority of our history, sleep happened low, close to the fire, and close to everyone else. The common thread wasn't the material. It was the logic. Get your body off the cold, damp ground, put something between you and the insects, and stay within reach of the fire and the group. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because for a long time, historians assumed ancient sleep must have come in two separate shifts each night, a first sleep and then a second sleep, with a stretch of quiet waking in between. That pattern is well documented in pre-industrial Europe by the historian Roger E. Kirch. But when researchers actually went and measured sleep in modern hunter-gatherer and forager horticulturalist groups, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia, they found something a little different. In a 2015 study published in Current Biology, Jerome Siegel and his colleagues tracked 94 people with wrist monitors for over 1,000 nights combined, and found these groups mostly slept in one consolidated block, falling asleep a few hours after sunset and waking a bit before dawn, averaging between 5.7 and 7 hours a night. They rarely napped. Sleep onset tracked the drop in nighttime temperature more closely than it tracked darkness itself. And strikingly, the San and Tsimane languages don't even have a word for insomnia. That doesn't mean ancient sleep was undisturbed, though. It just means the disturbance wasn't one shared midnight break. It was something more like a rotating watch. That 18-minute statistic I opened with comes from a 2017 study by David Sampson and his colleagues, published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B. They found that because people of different ages naturally drift toward different sleep schedules, teenagers staying up late, elders waking early, a mixed age group almost always has somebody awake and alert all night without anyone having to volunteer for guard duty. Sampson has called this the poorly sleeping grandparent hypothesis. Grandma waking at 4 in the morning isn't a malfunction. It might be exactly what kept the whole camp alive. Put all of that together, and you get a picture of ancient sleep that looks nothing like ours. Not a solo bedroom with the door locked, but a huddle of relatives around a low fire, on a bed of insect-repelling grass or packed earth, with somebody's eyes open at almost every hour of the night, generation after generation, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of staying alive until sunrise. Next time you complain about a bad night's sleep, remember that your ancestors would have killed for the luxury of sleeping badly behind a locked door, with nothing outside it but a quiet street. If you liked digging into this with me, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I've got a lot more ancient curiosities lined up. Until then, I'm Otto. Sleep tight, and maybe check that the fire's still going.